Nobody, absolutely nobody, should have to go through life like this. And here what we're going to be talking about is a deformity called clubfoot. This is a little baby with a bilateral clubfoot deformity. It's the most common musculoskeletal defect, and it occurs at approximately 1 in 750 births worldwide is the incidence. It's twice as common in the males as it is in females, and it occurs in both feet half of the time, which means half the time occurs just in one foot. And so here we have all these children all over the world in which we're trying to have a collaborative effort to try to help them. And so we're reimagining, and we know that globally we've got 200,000 a year occurring, and yet that means that because there's so many that still remain untreated, we've got 1 million who are untreated, and you can see the different things that it does in respect to stigma, and we have them not being able to be educated if they can't walk to school in many underserved countries, or that they end up not getting the education that they need, so therefore then they're not going to be sustainable in employment in life later on. The big key thing here is to say that we have just with Dr. James with surgery first assist, no, he's a surgical anesthetist, and he has just absolutely steeped us in the world of surgery in our keynote speaker, as our keynote speaker. The key thing here is that I'm going to be talking to you about something, and me, a surgical nurse of many, many decades, about something that is better helped by a non-surgical approach. And in this non-surgical approach, we have the great advantages of having it being less expensive and having resources in underdeveloped countries that is going to cost something to make the boy that we just saw walking with club feet in his early 20s not be something that has to be continued. So surgery is not the answer, and that's because we found out that if surgery is done, and it was hoped that we're going to pick up these cases when the baby is just very, very tiny, is something that in our society we want immediate responses and immediate success. So, and surgeons really do amazing things with surgery to reverse problems that are congenital. But when we find out that all the years that the approach to clubfoot deformity has been with surgery, we have found out that by the time they're in their 20s, and this has been miraculously all straightened when they're newborns and made the parents happy, they go into problems with pain from perhaps internal scarring in a concentrated area of many, many muscles and tendons, and the bones being very, very small and multiple. And so what has happened is that by the time they're in the prime of their life, they've had this clubfoot repair done surgically, they end up with pain. They end up with such big problems of quality of life that sometimes they even have to have amputations. It was in the early 30s that a physician by the name of Ignacio Ponseti had his surgery training. He thought that his world was very, very contained and fine, and he had just finished medical school in Barcelona in Spain. Came from a family in which he was actually, his dad was a watchmaker, and he learned a whole lot of precision in his very early years, just like most of our audience is here. And when he graduated, the day after, that's when things really started for him. That changed his life in that the Civil War in Spain broke out, and he was then having to be conscripted right away into the medic part of being in the military. And here he had amazing experiences during those 3 years that he was in the military, caring for orthopedic injuries and trauma. He saw a lot of exposed bone, muscle, and tendon. And so those were things that he did not know that were going to shape his career. And then in 3 or 4 years later, it was that the Republicans did not win, let's say, and he had to flee the country. And Dr. Ponseti found himself in Mexico, and he had some very valuable clinical experiences in Mexico, it so happened. And then by an odyssey, he made his way with an invitation to come to the orthopedic department at the University of Iowa, our next door state. And so Dr. Ponseti spent his entire career, and he died in 2009, still clinically active. And that when he came in 1941 to the University of Iowa, he was very, very interested, of course, in what occurred in World War II with more and more injuries and how to take care of orthopedic problems. But he dedicated himself to why was there a problem that if you performed surgery and you looked at outcomes down the line, clubfoot having a surgical way of being treated didn't have good outcomes. He used, over the decades, a method in which he just these are teeny little baby feet, if we're lucky enough to have the babies come to us at a young age, in which they just gently get manipulated, the little foot, and then in that position, which is more normal because it's simply turned in like this, they get put in a cast right away. About a week later, we change the cast, melt it off, we can say, because we put them in a tub, and then we cut the cast off. We don't use a cast cutter. And then we, once again, manipulate that little foot until it's getting more and more normalized. And after about 4 to 6 casts that we change weekly, then we correct that clubfoot. And it returns to its normal shape and function. This is a time capsule of seeing that. All right. Has anybody had braces on their teeth? And what is the principle there is that we get them all straightened, and then what do we have to do? What's really key? Anybody had braces here? The retainer. So here we have made a correction. We have, though, a memory. Mother Nature wants to have all of those foot positions that the baby had in utero and had when it was born go back. And when they're relaxing during sleep, there is this tendency for it to go back. So there is the retainer. And this is the retainer, which is a very, very important brace that once the baby has finished the casting phase of their correction, then they go into this brace. These are basically a bar and shoes, and they are needed during their nap time up until the time that the baby has started to walk. We like to see them wearing it all the time, even when they start to crawl. But by the time they start to walk, then they're free of the brace during the day. But the critical thing, the thing where we need to have the compliance from the parents is that they're to be at least 8 hours a day wearing the brace. So, of course, that's all during the night and during nap time up until the time they're 4 years old. So they're going to change shoe size. They're going to have a whole lot of issues with the child rebelling very often, and the parents saying, oh, this is very, very tiring type of thing to keep the child in that at night when they tend to take them off, but they can learn to be compliant. All over the world, we can use the Ponseti method. It's non-surgical treatment of clubfoot deformity. We think that it's very important in our collaborative efforts and in our what we're learning to try to bring it globally is, of course, identifying the child as early as possible. How to get them into the care when they are as young as possible, because everything, of course, is so much more moldable. So we look to identification, and that's part of what we're doing is that we don't see that much clubfoot in the United States because we treat it at such a young age. When we go to other countries, we hope that we're going to have people alert to the idea of, do they see somebody with a clubfoot deformity, and can we bring that person in and then come in for correction. And so we talked about the correction process with the importance of really trying to avoid surgery. I'm not saying that some of these children certainly relapse. Sometimes it's indicated that they go on and they will have to have surgery. But if we can catch them early, if they have the majority of clubfoot corrections and deformities, probably about upward to 95 to 99% of them can have the correction with a non-surgical method, and it be sustained in them throughout the rest of their life. So those are what we're trying to do in respect to the correction. And then the follow-up, of course, could be more important. How are we doing with data collection in finding out, again, if we're going to have the right kinds of outcomes, and also with the containment of cost. And so I'm going to turn it over to Jackie at this point, and she's going to talk about how we're trying to bring that all over the world outside of Iowa. Madam.
Welcome. We're glad to have you here with us. I'm sorry you missed Patty's, because she really talked about the method, and you might want to visit with her a little more about that as we later. So I'm going to talk to you about the Rotary part of this connection. So how many of you are familiar with Rotary, the organization of Rotary? Well, we'll help you with a little more detail on that. Rotary is an organization of worldwide people of action. We have 1.2 million members, 35,000 clubs, and we're in over 200 countries. And Rotary started in 1905 when Steve was talking about having a vision and one person can do something. Rotary started with one man, Paul Harris, in 1905, and he had a vision for getting people together in a network and to learn more about what they were doing in their business. But as we'll see, the outgrowth of that, some 12 years later in 1917, the Rotary Foundation was founded, and the Rotary Foundation is truly our partner in this effort as well. And the Rotary Foundation started 1917, $12, Kansas City, Missouri. It's a Midwestern thing. And over time, it has refined itself, and the purposes of the focus of what the Rotary Foundation does is really centered on these 6 areas of focus: promoting peace, fighting disease, providing clean water, saving mothers and children, supporting education, and growing local economies. We say that in different ways, but those 6 areas of focus are, we're all about that. We're all about that. So the Rotary Foundation is helping us with our mission as well. So what happens when you have all these millions of people all over the world, and they all have interests? They all have passions. They want to do good in the world. So what they do is they form themselves together in Rotarian action groups. And these there are about 24 Rotarian action groups. And they come together and they focus on what they are passionate about, and then they take that information out into the world and start doing things. So again, through those 6 areas of focus, the RAG for Clubfoot, we're really all about maternal child health. That's really our focus. So we formed this RAG, Rotarian Action Group for Clubfoot in 2014. And it really started in Iowa City, Cedar Rapids area, where Dr. Ponseti was practicing his method of Ponseti treatment. And so we have had some periods of growth, and we are now, we had forming, storming, norming. We are now into the norming phase, where we have established our website, and we are gathering people together who feel passionately about what we're doing. And so the RAG is a clearinghouse, a facilitator, and we are trying to get Rotary clubs and districts on board with what we're doing. And basically, what we're doing is training doctors. And we train doctors all over the world, and Jill will get into more of the details of how that has happened. But what we are doing is taking the Ponseti method to doctors around the world. We're just getting started on that. We've just had a few of those projects, but the idea is to take that to low-resource countries because it doesn't cost a lot to use the Ponseti method. It's very, very cost-effective, doesn't need much. It just needs casting and training of those doctors, so they are really comfortable with that method. So what we want to do is, this is a wonderful opportunity for us to show what one person can do, what ways you can help us. We can recruit Rotarians around the world. We can support the training of healthcare professionals. We can assist families and caregivers by supporting them, helping them have transportation to get their casting, housing, food, whatever is needed to help support that compliance and getting the child or the person seen and cared for. The provision of braces, that's a very, this child will need several sets of these over time in those years of bracing. So those are an important key to the successful treatment, and we want to make sure that those braces are available also. And they can be, we've seen this, handed down, shared. Every child doesn't need a brand new set of braces. They can use hand-me-downs. We want to have public awareness of Clubfoot treatment and, of course, promote early referral. And there are, as far as advocating, we want to make sure that this method is the standard method that's approved by insurance and so forth. So now Jill, who is our co-chair, is going to really take you through the steps of how we got to this point. And maybe here. So, use your clicker.
All right. Thank you, Jackie, first of all, for the handoff there. And before I go any further, I want to introduce the co-chair of our RAG for Clubfoot, and that's John Alkenfels, who's been kind of circulating the room, getting your names and addresses, because, of course, we're not going to let you out of this room without getting our hooks into you in some way or another. If we do a house metaphor for a second, Patty took us up the front door and brought us into the living room, and Jackie took us into the kitchen and talked about how Rotary is involved with it. And now I'm going to take you to the backyard, and I'm going to lean over the fence, and I'm going to tell you a lot of things that are things that we've confronted. And I'm going to be pretty honest about what some of the things that we've learned. Most of you probably know by now that when you volunteer for something, you usually take away more than you give. There's something in it for us. And certainly, I would say, for all of us who serve on the RAG board, I think we've learned a heck of a lot in the past 3 years. First of all, Rotarian action groups
are sort of like satellites. You know, there's kind of Earth, and then there's satellites, and Earth is Rotary International. And then we have these little satellites. And these satellites, these Rotarian action groups, are built on the passion, particular passion of Rotarians. And that's unstoppable, because Rotary at first kind of considered that these were competitions. And then they realized that when somebody has a passion and you allow them the avenue to follow that passion, you know, you can get a lot done. And so now Rotary has really embraced that. So first of all, our Rotarian Action Group was formed by Herb Wilson in Iowa City, who is a colleague, not a medical colleague, but a colleague of Dr. Ponseti. And he had the vision and the dream and the Rotarian passion to help create this. And we had to be approved by Rotary International. So I'm going to be telling you kind of some nuts and bolts of what partnership is about. So the first thing we had to do in order to be approved as one of those little satellites out there is to get Rotary approval. So we had to have bylaws, and we had to, you know, we had to chug down those particular things and check off those boxes. And then our vision, really our vision is driven by data, because we know by looking at populations and the, you know, it's a per capita thing. So high population countries obviously have more clubfoot cases than low population, but it isn't that any one country has a predominance of clubfoot, and it's not low resource countries. It just occurs in populations. So by looking at the data, we came up with the formula that if we could train 4,000 doctors in 10 years' time, every child in the world would have access to Ponseti method treatment. So the other thing that was really important was that we were in the right place at the right time, and that is because the Ponseti Clinic was at the University of Iowa, and so there was also Ponseti International Association was there. So one of the first things we did, now we're getting into the nuts and bolts of it, we had to sign a memorandum of understanding, which Rotary required for us in order to work with another agency. So again, we're getting into the legalistic side of it. Also, if we want people to contribute to our organization, we have to establish ourselves as a 501c3, which is kind of a long process. And early on, we decided that it was easier to take a simpler road. And so in District 6000, basically in Rotary, Iowa is divided into two major districts, and then there are two districts that are shared, one with both with Nebraska, and then Nebraska and South Dakota. So District 6000, which is the southern half of Iowa, acted as the agent, our 501c3 agent. And everybody knows what a 501c3 is, right? It's among other things, is an incentive, maybe not the same incentive given our new income tax laws, but that waits to be seen. And the other legalistic thing, and John was instrumental in this, was the Articles of Incorporation. So our board incorporated, and basically what that does is it allows our board members to be free of liability in the decisions that we make. So it's a protection for us, and that, again, a legal document. And we're fortunate, by the way, that a lot of this time and the legal work for this was donated. So again, you know, when you're in a partnership and you're trying to do good in the world, we still have to be dealing with a lot of nuts and bolts. So that was kind of our crawling part of, if we want to use a metaphor with that. And the other, I had another thing that I was going to think, and I lost it, so I'll come back to it when I think of it again. Oh, I know. Rotary. I'm not sure, but I'm going to say it again, Jackie, and that is Rotary is non-sectarian and apolitical, which allows us then to work any place in the world. And, there are stories, there are true stories about when Rotary was more active in getting rid of polio in the world, that they actually, countries declared a truce in a war so that Rotarians could come in and immunize kids against polio. So that's the power of being non-political. And again, non-sectarian is the fact that we, as Steve said, we respect everybody's philosophy and honor every individual. So you don't have to be Christian or Hindu or Muslim, or that's not important to us. And it's also, by the way, a beauty in Rotary, because I know every week that I sit down at a table with people who are very different politically than I am and religiously than I am, and I can enjoy their friendship. And I thought about that yesterday when we were riding over from Iowa and across the Missouri. I was thinking, what a blessing it has been to meet 4 people that I wouldn't have known, and that's because of Rotary. So that's my little advertisement for Rotary, by the way. So anyway, now we're walking here, and we had to form a strategy for how to train these doctors. First of all, Rotary International provides global grants, and under that there are vocational training teams. And vocational training teams means that we can do non-Rotarian doctors, and we can send a team of people to train. And that's exactly what we do. That's the model that we use, is a train-the-trainer model. So we go into a country, we train X number of doctors, and then the onus is on those doctors that they're going to train other doctors in the country. And hopefully we've got Rotarians that are going to support by maybe supplying the plaster for the casts or lodging, those kinds of things. So we're really lucky with Ponseti International because, number one, Steve, I think you said this morning in your, you go to the places that have the most need, and that's where you can make a difference. That's a paraphrase of, you said it much more beautifully this morning. But we were lucky with Ponseti International because they had the international experience, that they knew where the low-hanging fruit was. We knew what countries that it was politically safe to go into, and we could get a lot of work done early. And then you build the momentum. You build on successes. So, we had our first grant, I believe, was in Brazil, and we already had, Ponseti International already had a rapport with the orthopedic surgeons in Brazil. So, that was an easy, quote-unquote, easy way to start. And, we also, I'll just tell you, some of the things we've learned. We've learned, and Steve, you probably know this, and maybe you know this too, about the experience of shadow governments. That in some countries, the existing government is really not the government that's working there. Well, Rotary basically can't work with a shadow government. So, it's the experience that Ponseti International and the wisdom that they had there was critical for us as we formed our training teams. And the other thing, of course, is we have to raise money. And Steve has a wonderful model there because you have a hands-on model. Vocational training teams, we say, are not as sexy because Rotarians love to go out. They love to go out and dig boreholes, in Haiti. And they love to roll up their sleeves and, get in there and do things. And, you have the success with surgeons who are able to do that. With vocational training teams, basically, our finance is philanthropic. And that's a little harder to get money from people when they're contributing to a cause, but they don't get to really see it, they don't get to feel it, they don't get to experience it. So that's one of the challenges, and I think we've met some of those challenges in a wonderful way. And I'll tell you that Rotary International, again, I'm over the back fence and talking to you about this. Rotary International has some very strong stipulations about how we can raise money and how we can spend our money. But we have kind of a parallel fundraising campaign going on right now called Iowa's Gift to the World. And we have a benefactor in District 6000 who has offered to match Rotarian, Iowa Rotarian donations up to $125,000. So in July of this year, we are at about $74,000 right now, which means we have $150,000. And by July of this year, we're resolved that we will have that $125,000 raised, which means we're going to have $250,000, which is going to give, which is going to give us access to do some things that we can do that are legitimate, but that Rotary probably wouldn't let us do within the confines of that. So again, you know, you have to, it's not that you work harder sometimes, it's that you work smarter and you leverage and you collectively, it's been so fun on this board, I think, to come together and to think out things. And you have these minds, you have lawyers' minds and doctors' minds and, marketing minds and, other medical minds. It's just, it's an amazing, and John's business background. So it's great to have this meeting of minds that come together and we try to build these solutions using the collective experience of the people on the board. And then telling the story. If you don't, Steve did, we were talking this morning about, wonderful branding and wonderful, meaningful videos, and we're talking about, this is another area, we kind of lean on Jackie a bit for that, but if you don't tell your story, nobody's going to be interested and you're going to die. I mean, I don't care how noble your cause is, unless you can tell your story and have people relate to it and respond to it, you're not going to get the support you need. And then building toward future effectiveness. I've talked a little bit about Rotary International. Rotary Foundation sometimes still sees us as a bit of a competitor, so we have to be very careful. I think, as we bring people along, they understand what the research tells us is it's not a choice of I'm going to give $10 to you or I'm going to give $10 to you. Usually, if you open your pocket and you give $10 one place, that pocket stays open, and generosity breeds generosity. So we know that, when we encourage people to give, they continue to give. Some things that we're looking at, one of the things that we're going to be examining is corporate support. It's something that we hope we can also get a match with, and again, we're going to probably look at local businesses, meaning Iowa businesses, to garner corporate support, because bottom line, you have to have the dollars to support your cause, or else you're not going to move forward on it. We, as a result of and there's another slide that's coming up, but primarily we've worked in South America at this point, Central and South America. And as a result of the work that we're doing, we're talking about a possibility of an orthopedic surgeon summit about Clubfoot, which will take place, we think, maybe in August or September of next year, which is wonderful, because now a side benefit of this is that we're collecting doctors, and doctors from different countries are beginning to talk to each other, which is just incredible. Another challenge for us is ministries in different countries. For example, we had a grant, a VTT team in November that went to Mexico, and we had difficulty because there's a ban in Mexico against importing shoes. Well, these braces are considered shoes. So how do we get them into the country? So those are our challenges. So it's not that you're just simply going into the field and doing service. You have to be very politically aware, and you try to change by changing policy in countries and influencing policy. So, it's strategic that if you can befriend first ladies and, people who are influential in the country. The other thing is, and Herb Wilson talks about this all the time, very 90 years old, passionate about the fact that we are still doing surgery, orthopedic surgery for Clubfoot in the United States, and insurance companies are still paying for it. And it's another challenge that we plan in the next few years to take on, that Herb says is so much better, but it's a moral and ethical decision that we should not, when we have a 90%, 97% effective gold standard, that there should be any surgery done in the United States. And one of the ways that we can impact that is through the insurance companies. So that's in our plans. Okay, if I can advance a slide here. Oh, I'm sorry. Trying to do it with the microphone. Yeah, I'm doing right, but it's, there we go. So this is just, again, I'm going through this word by word. You're going to stay here for another hour. No. But what we did, early on, for most of us are visual learners, and we needed some kind of schemata of, exactly how this whole thing works. Now, I think we did this about a year and a half ago, John, and we certainly have some revisions because it's a working document. Any document is really a working document if it's going to reflect what we're doing. So that's kind of, again, some nuts and bolts of what we did. So here are the global grants. We've completed one. We trained, I think, 63 doctors in Brazil. There are about 4,000 cases of clubfoot every year, born every year in Brazil. So, there's an ongoing need. Bolivia, Colombia, Mexico. Mexico was just, these are all vocational training teams. Now, we're looking at maybe there might be another way to do this besides vocational training team. But anyway, Mexico, we trained 35 doctors. And then these doctors then in turn train other doctors. And you see here, this is, by the way, I'll just point this out. This is Dr. Jose Merquende, who was kind of the hand-chosen disciple from Dr. Ponseti. And Dr. Merquende is on our board and has participated in all the training trips. It's just an amazing, amazing man. I think this year we probably did 3. We'd love to do 10. But we're growing. We're young yet. Nigeria, this wasn't established through our reg, but Nigeria is pretty well trained, and they have a center of excellence there, and we're talking about replicating a center of excellence for countries in Africa where doctors could come and actually be trained at a center of excellence. But an interesting thing is Liberia was one of the countries that we looked at, and just a little stat from that. I think there are 2, is that right, John? 2 orthopedic surgeons in all of Liberia, and much of the work is done by basically a kind of sort of trained technician who does the Ponseti. So for all of Liberia, there are really 3 people who are doing anything. We're currently looking at both Cambodia and South Africa. Yeah. At this point, it's been to orthopedic surgeons. But interestingly, the technician from Liberia was at the University of Iowa and actually was in the Ponseti clinic and observed in the Ponseti clinic. So, it's not that it hasn't been offered, but by training orthopedic surgeons, the onus then is to reach out and train more orthopedic surgeons. Well, of course, it depends on the country, and I think I'll get to your question in just a second. Okay, so this is the funding process through Rotary International. And basically, clubs or districts, first of all, would partner. So we would need, for example, a club in Iowa, it could be New Jersey, whatever, and an international club would be the one in the district that the doctors are going to be trained. So we have a host club. So we have to, so kind of we're kind of a broker. We kind of we build partnerships. So we connect them, and they create a grant, a proposal. Funds are given from districts, and I just checked with John. It depends on some districts. For example, if these two together, the host club and the international club would say put together $2,000. Simple math for a second. The district may match another, a one-to-one. So then we have $4,000. And then Rotary International, when it's accepted at Rotary International, they match one-to-one. So that's how the money is leveraged, okay? So I just wanted to do that funding process before we go on to the next slide. And so this is kind of what happens in a grant. And here's funding. So you can see that the match from the Rotary Foundation is $46,000. So we're talking maybe 90, 92, somewhere in that. It depends on the country. Obviously, transportation is going to be higher to go further away, so on and so forth. And for the most part, I think we've tried to do Rotarian homes to house training. That's okay. I mean, we haven't really had. A lot of times we're just using hotels to house the doctors. But that's kind of, so it varies. But you know, that's kind of what you're looking at. 3-4 days, isn't it? About that.
4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
A lot of preparation ahead of time to bring the doctors from that the doctors have identified, and orthopedic surgeons from the other areas in that whole country, to make it a whole country. And so that when they are already with preliminary plans coming to the area where they're going to have the training sessions, they need to be there about 4 or 5 days and utilize critical types of patients. And then we have what we call the PCC, and they are going to over and over again have clinical sessions in which they're going to test. And the finesse, the tremendous finesse, and you were talking to that maybe right enough to say by your first name, that we really know that they try to see how well we get the outcomes when they're not pediatric orthopedic surgeons for one thing, which we think may be the gold standard. And even then, it is very important to have as much of the manipulation process to understand that in your training situation, what do you tell the people who are clinical officers? Do you know if they actually are treating the public properly? Some going to be specialists like that. And yet we have out of the world, that is the Ponseti gold standard to use. Videos here, and Patty is going to talk about real on to advance the slide. But I just wanted to leave you, on my part, with what Dr. Gardy said last night, that it's not charity that we're doing, it's an exercise. Perhaps a rule of thumb is to say that about $5,000 per trainer, the person who's going to be trained, helps us with identifying the number of what the amount of population is, so that we go to do a training session. rule of thumb is that regardless of how many we have, each of those surgeons who are going to be trained are approximately $5,000 to do it. And there is a little child who is real Ron, and he was found in Nigeria. It was a mission trip that they were on, but they were not doing a medical mission trip. They found this little boy in a village, and his story was as it, with stigma, his parents had abandoned him as a baby. Then he was cared for by his grandmother, and they came along and identified him at the age that he was, and he had treatment with a Ponseti method. And taken back by his parents, got to school. So there's an outcome of treating it at much older age group than what, of course, you would want to have happen, but that's very common in the underdeveloped countries. Octavia, another older child, and his has the bilateral manifestations of the clubfoot deformity, and there he has with his treatment. I guess I thought that we had the one of him running, but we don't.
Yeah,
but
we'll
keep going. I thought he did. Yeah. Ta-da! Lost. Anyway, that boy took off running down the running down the hallways. And this is what our goal would be, of course, a world without clubfoot deformity. And we'd like to know if then we have one more. We've got to have the 4,000 trained treatment providers based on data. That's how many physicians we would need to try to help the populations of the world. That we would have the braces be high quality and affordable, and that's quite a challenge. Are locally directed, sustainable clinics sustainable? Are they going to be able to collect the data so that we can see our outcomes and hopefully would have 2 million clubfoot children in the next 10 years? 2025, we started that treated, and we started that thinking in 2014 when we started what's called our Rotarian Action Group. These are ways that we can be contacted, and our collaboration is what we're focusing on as much as anything. I wonder if you have any questions. It is complicated. It's not to say, is the brace here? Pass it around. Here in the United States, there have been engineers, actually right from the University of Iowa, who have devised low cost. It's interesting is that the best way that we found out after producing them with the lowest cost we could think of in the United States is have them now produced in China. And of course that means that the production of them can be, I believe, about to the cost, if necessary, to the family of $25 for a brace versus many hundreds of dollars that we can charge for them. So there's a great variability, but the actual ability to get them into underserved countries is $25. And what else, John? Could you help with that? And we're trying to have the mindset that these are all can be repurposed. There's no reason why we can't replace the shoes as they certainly get worn out, the little shoe part and then the bar, and that we're trying to think of ways in which they are collected by the families after they finished using them. They can be repurposed. The other thing is that you would say, well, why can't they be produced as it had been in the countries? And this is where things get to be dicey, is that you want to use the local cobbler. But they were using leather, and leather was giving problems very often with breakdown of the skin and not a good fit for the children as we have, and these are still being perfected. We have what's called Clubfoot Solutions, and they manufacture club feet braces, and many different manufacturers, and we're still trying to find out what is really the best and how to get them into the countries, because John explained how politically you can have, and I feel that the country was really Brazil. Isn't that where we want to have these really fine shoes made? Well, Brazil, I think, is the country that said, no, we don't want to have these, because when you go across into, not immigration, what's it called, when you go through customs, those are considered shoes. Well, now you know. This is a medical device. Yeah. Tough. It's longer, of course. Yes. Meaning, are you saying if they come into having a correction when they're so much older, it's really going to take so much more time. And then you've got the less malleableness of and then the muscles and the tendons is what mostly this is a problem of. The bones are in place, but there's multiple bones that have many, many years been, if we have a child, hasn't been corrected, in such a fixed position. So they have to have a lot of compliance. That means they're going to be in wheelchairs while they're in their casting phase. The casting phase is going to take longer. They certainly may have to have surgery. Yeah, it's, you know, it's like we just saw that wonderful thing about success, and we saw how messy it is. Yes. It is totally the philosophy. We want them to buy into that. Well, I think maybe John could address that. We think they should have some skin in the game. Each country should, from a Rotarian point of view, those Rotary clubs should be trying to get their funding for the training of the doctors. And then the doctors themselves, I guess they have to hope that philosophically they feel this is for the best thing for our children. Even though they're surgeons and love to do surgery, they have to know it's best. And I know we have to let people go. Thank you. It's what? Doctor's honor. Best thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for rushing.
No, that was just the way it should be.